The morning light fell across the tall glass building of Marlowe Industries. The lobby was wide, with marble floors that shined under the bright lights. People in neat suits walked quickly to their offices, carrying files and laptops. Their steps echoed across the floor, and their voices filled the air with busy conversations. In the corner of the lobby, a man pushed a mop across the tiles. His name was Daniel. He was the janitor of the building. He wore a plain uniform, old shoes, and his hands were rough from years of hard work. Most of the employees passed by him without notice. Some greeted him with a short nod, but many acted as if he was invisible. Daniel did not mind. He was quiet by nature and focused on his work. He believed that every task, no matter how small, deserved respect if it was done with care. Each day he cleaned the building from the lobby to the top floors, making sure the floors were clear and the halls tidy. While he worked, he often listened carefully to the conversations around him. He had sharp ears, and he could understand more than people guessed. On this morning, the air in the building felt different. Whispers moved through the staff. The CEO of the company, Mr. Haru, was arriving from Japan. He was known to be a man of few words. He rarely visited the local branch, and when he did, his presence made everyone nervous. He was called the silent CEO because he spoke little in meetings and observed everything with sharp eyes. Nobody wanted to make a mistake in front of him. The employees straightened their ties and adjusted their dresses as they waited for the arrival. The managers gave last-minute instructions. Everyone wanted the lobby to look perfect when the CEO entered. In the middle of all this, Daniel continued to mop the floor slowly, his movements calm, his face without worry. At 10 sharp, a black car stopped at the front entrance. 2 assistants stepped out first, followed by Mr. Haru. He was not tall, but his presence was strong. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, and his eyes were calm yet watchful. He walked with quiet steps into the lobby, followed by his team. The employees bowed slightly as he passed, some with nervous smiles, some holding their breath. The CEO paused in the lobby, as if to take in the place. His eyes moved across the shining marble, the clean walls, the neat desks at the reception. Finally, his gaze fell on Daniel, who was still mopping in the corner. For a brief second their eyes met, then Daniel lowered his head and stepped back so he would not be in the way. The managers hurried forward to greet Mr. Haru. They welcomed him with polite English, explaining how the branch had grown in sales, how new projects were running, how the staff worked hard. Mr. Haru nodded but said little. He listened, his face calm, showing no sign of approval or disapproval. It made the managers speak even faster, trying harder to please him. As they walked, one of the assistants tried to explain the numbers in English. But his words were uncertain, and the meaning was not always clear. Mr. Haru frowned slightly. The managers exchanged nervous glances. They all wished they could speak to him in his own language, but none of them had studied Japanese. Their voices grew more uneasy, and the silence of the CEO felt heavier with each passing second. In the background, Daniel listened. He had always loved learning languages in his spare time. Years ago, he had worked near a Japanese restaurant and often spoke with the staff. He practiced reading and listening whenever he could. Over the years, he became skilled enough to understand conversations. But he had never told anyone in the building about it. To them, he was only the janitor who cleaned floors. Now, as he heard the struggling English of the assistant and the confused looks of the managers, something stirred inside him. He felt the weight of silence around the CEO and the fear in the staff. He hesitated. It was not his place to step forward. Yet his heart told him that sometimes even a janitor could make a difference. Daniel took a deep breath. He leaned on his mop for a moment, watching the group. Then, in a voice calm and clear, he spoke. The words that left his mouth were not English. They were Japanese. The lobby fell silent. Every head turned toward him. The managers looked shocked. The assistants froze in surprise. Even Mr. Haru stopped walking and turned his head fully toward Daniel. The sound of Japanese, spoken with respect and clarity, echoed in the large space. Daniel stood straight, his mop in his hand, and repeated his words. He had said, "Good morning, sir, welcome to the branch. I hope your visit will be pleasant." His tone carried no pride, only courtesy. His eyes were steady, though his heart beat fast in his chest. The silence stretched for a moment that felt like forever. Then, for the first time since entering the building, Mr. Haru's face changed. A small smile touched his lips. He replied in Japanese, his voice calm but warmer than before. The assistants exchanged quick looks of surprise, and the managers did not understand a single word, but they could see that something important had just happened. The janitor, who had been invisible, was now the center of every eye in the room. The lobby was still silent after Daniel spoke. The managers did not move, their faces frozen with disbelief. The assistants whispered to each other, trying to understand how a janitor could speak the language of their CEO. Only Mr. Haru stood calm, his eyes focused on Daniel, as if he had just discovered something rare. Mr. Haru stepped closer. His shoes made soft sounds on the marble floor. He stopped only a few feet from Daniel and asked a question in Japanese. His voice was steady but curious. Daniel listened carefully and replied in the same language with simple respect. Their exchange lasted only a few sentences, yet in that short time, the balance of the room shifted. The managers who moments ago felt important now stood aside, powerless to follow the words being shared. The employees nearby whispered nervously. Some leaned toward each other asking if they had heard correctly. A janitor speaking with the CEO in Japanese was something none of them could have imagined. For years, Daniel had been the quiet figure who mopped floors, cleaned windows, and emptied bins. Now he stood speaking fluently to the highest man in the company. When their short talk ended, Mr. Haru gave Daniel a slow nod, almost like a bow of respect. Then he turned to his assistants and gave a quiet instruction in Japanese. One of them hurried to take notes. The managers felt their hearts tighten. They could not understand what was being said, yet it was clear the janitor had earned the CEO's attention in a way none of them could. Mr. Haru then followed the managers toward the elevators. His expression was still calm, but his eyes showed a light that had not been there before. Daniel watched them leave, then returned to his work, lowering his head once again. He lifted the mop and continued cleaning the floor as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside, he felt the weight of what had just occurred. The silence of the lobby slowly filled again with whispers and nervous chatter on the upper floors. The managers tried to recover. In the meeting room, they presented charts and figures, speaking quickly, hoping to impress the CEO. But the thought of what had happened downstairs did not leave their minds. Some of them were angry. Some were confused. One of them whispered to another, "How could a janitor speak with him like that?" Another muttered, "This could make us look unprepared." While the meeting went on, Daniel continued with his duties. He cleaned the halls and polished the railings. He was not proud, but his thoughts kept returning to the moment he had spoken. He wondered if he had crossed a line. He had not planned it. His words had come from respect, not from pride. Yet he also knew that the CEO had listened, and that alone meant something. At lunchtime, a young clerk named Maria came to him. She had seen the scene in the lobby. With wide eyes she whispered, "Daniel, how did you learn Japanese?" Daniel gave a small smile. He told her he had studied it years ago, practicing in his free time. He explained how he loved languages because they opened doors to understand people better. Maria nodded with wonder. She said she would never forget what she saw this morning. Later in the afternoon, a message came down from the top floor. One of the assistants approached Daniel while he was wiping the windows. The assistant spoke politely and said the CEO requested his presence upstairs. Daniel was surprised. He had never been called to the executive floor before. He set down his cleaning tools, washed his hands, and followed the assistant to the elevator. When the doors opened, Daniel stepped into a place very different from the lower floors. The carpets were thick, the walls lined with art, the air filled with quiet. The assistant led him into a wide office where Mr. Haru sat by the window overlooking the city. The managers were not there. It was only the CEO, two assistants, and Daniel. Mr. Haru gestured for him to sit. Daniel obeyed, his hands resting calmly on his knees. For a few moments, there was silence. Then Mr. Haru began to speak in Japanese. He asked Daniel about his background, how he had learned the language, and what inspired him to practice. Daniel answered with honesty. He told him he had admired Japanese culture since young age, that he respected discipline and patience, and that he enjoyed learning by listening and practicing with anyone who was willing to teach. The CEO listened with close attention. His eyes softened slightly as Daniel spoke. It was rare for him to meet someone who studied his language out of passion rather than duty. When Daniel finished, Mr. Haru leaned back in his chair and said in English, "You surprise me. Your work is humble, yet your heart is strong. You respect your task, but you also respect knowledge." Few people combine both. Daniel bowed his head at the words. He said, "Sir, I am only doing what I can. Every place needs cleaning, every place needs respect. Whether I mop floors or learn words, I believe it is the same spirit." The assistants exchanged quick glances, impressed by his calm answer. Mr. Haru gave a faint smile again. He then stood and walked toward the window. His hands folded behind his back as he looked out at the skyline. After a pause, he said, "Daniel, I will see you again before I leave the city. You may go for now." Daniel rose, bowed slightly, and left the room with quiet steps. His heart beat fast, but he kept his face calm. When he returned to his cleaning duties, the employees looked at him with wide eyes. Whispers filled the halls once more. The janitor had been called to meet the silent CEO in private. Nobody knew what had been said inside that office, but everyone knew one thing. Daniel was no longer invisible. The news spread through the building like fire. By the next morning, every floor was whispering about the janitor who spoke Japanese and met the silent CEO in private. Some employees spoke with admiration, saying Daniel was gifted and humble. Others carried doubt, claiming it was luck or a trick. The managers, however, were uneasy. They feared their positions might look weak if the CEO placed trust in a janitor instead of them. Daniel kept to his routine. He arrived early, swept the lobby, and checked the restrooms. He moved from one floor to another with quiet focus. He did not let the talk of others disturb him. Still, he could feel the eyes watching him wherever he went. He had been invisible before, but now he was noticed by everyone. The change was not always comfortable. Around noon, Maria, the young clerk, approached him again. She carried a lunchbox and asked if she could sit with him for a short break. Daniel agreed. They sat in the staff corner where few people came. Maria spoke with excitement. She told him that the CEO's assistants had been asking about him, wanting to know more of his background. Daniel listened but gave no special reaction. He only said, "Whatever happens, I will continue my work. This place must stay clean." Maria admired his calmness. She said most people would boast if they were in his place, but Daniel was different. He smiled gently and replied, "Pride does not sweep the floor, and it does not help anyone. Work done with respect is enough." That afternoon, another unexpected event took place. A meeting between the CEO and the board of directors was scheduled in the grand conference hall. The managers prepared thick files, numbers, and reports. They were ready to prove their worth. Daniel was cleaning outside the hall when one of the assistants stepped out. The assistant noticed him and said, "Daniel, come inside for a moment." "The CEO wishes it." Daniel hesitated but obeyed. He entered the wide hall, where a long table stretched across the room. The directors sat in sharp suits, papers spread before them. At the head of the table sat Mr. Haru, calm as always. His eyes turned to Daniel as soon as he entered. The room fell quiet. Everyone looked confused at the sight of a janitor in the middle of an important meeting. Mr. Haru spoke in Japanese, asking Daniel to sit at a small chair near the side. Daniel bowed and sat, his hands resting on his knees. The directors shifted uneasily. Some frowned, some whispered, and some stared openly. None of them dared to question the CEO, but their faces showed clear disapproval. The meeting began. The managers presented numbers, sales figures, and plans for growth. They spoke quickly in English, hoping to impress. Daniel sat silently, watching and listening. But often the directors asked questions in Japanese. The managers could not understand and waited for the assistants to translate. The translations were slow, sometimes unclear. The flow of the meeting suffered. After a while, the CEO turned toward Daniel and asked a question in Japanese about the data just presented. Daniel took a breath, then explained in Japanese what the managers had tried to say. His words were clear and respectful, carrying the meaning without mistake. The directors nodded, their expressions changing to interest. For the first time, the meeting moved smoothly. The managers grew tense. They saw how easily the janitor bridged the gap between languages. Their prepared words sounded weak compared to his calm explanations. Yet Daniel never claimed credit. He spoke only when asked, and each time he ended with a bow of respect toward the CEO and the board. By the end of the meeting, the directors seemed more relaxed. They whispered to one another with approval. The CEO gave Daniel a small nod before dismissing him. Daniel stood, bowed again, and left quietly. He returned to his mop and bucket, as if nothing had happened. But everyone who had been inside that room knew something had changed. The silent CEO had allowed a janitor to guide one of the most important meetings of the year. Later that evening, when the meeting was over, some employees surrounded Daniel in the lobby. They asked how he could speak so well, how long he had studied, and why he never told anyone. Daniel answered with patience. He said learning was his own path, and he did not need to show it to others until the time was right. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. The employees felt respect, even those who had once looked down on him. In the manager's office, however, frustration grew. One manager slammed his desk and said, "If this continues, the CEO might think we are useless." Another agreed, saying, "That janitor makes us look small." They argued among themselves, their fear rising. None of them dared to confront the CEO, so their anger pointed toward Daniel instead. While they plotted, Daniel finished his day as usual. He walked home under the evening sky, carrying only a small bag. His steps were steady, his thoughts quiet. He remembered the look of approval on the directors' faces, and the rare smile of Mr. Haru. He felt no pride, only a sense that respect, when given honestly, always found its place. What Daniel did not know was that tomorrow would bring an even greater test. The managers were not ready to accept him, and the CEO had not yet revealed why he showed such interest in a janitor who mopped floors. A silent storm was building, and Daniel was standing at the center of it. The next morning, the office buzzed with more whispers than usual. The story of the janitor in the board meeting had already spread to every corner of the building. Some employees were proud that someone from their branch had impressed the CEO. Others were unsettled, wondering what it meant for their own positions. The managers felt the most pressure of all. They had prepared numbers and speeches for weeks, yet the CEO had trusted a janitor to carry the meaning across. It was a wound to their pride. In his small corner of the lobby, Daniel pushed his mop as always. His expression was calm, though he could feel the change in the air. People who once ignored him now stared. Some greeted him with awkward respect, while others whispered behind his back. Daniel paid no mind. He had no wish to rise above anyone. His goal was simple, to do his work with care. But deep inside, he wondered what more the silent CEO might ask of him. Upstairs in the executive office, the managers held a private meeting without the CEO. Their voices were sharp, filled with frustration. One said, "This cannot continue. If the janitor keeps gaining the CEO's trust, our place in this company will shrink. Another replied, we must remind the CEO of our own value, not let him be distracted by someone with no rank. After much debate, they agreed to watch Daniel closely. If he made one mistake, they would use it to show he was not worthy of attention. Later in the day, an unexpected call came. Daniel was once again summoned to the executive floor. When he entered the wide office, he found Mr. Haru waiting by the long window, hands folded behind his back. The assistants stood nearby with files in their arms. Daniel bowed and waited quietly. This time, the CEO spoke in English, his voice calm and steady. Daniel, tell me, why do you work here as a janitor? Your skill in my language is rare. You could seek other work. Why remain with mop and bucket? Daniel lifted his eyes slightly. He answered with honesty. Sir, work is not about what others see. Cleaning teaches patience. It reminds me that no task is too small. I did not study Japanese to climb higher. I studied because I respected it. I do this work for the same reason. Every place deserves care. The assistants shifted, surprised at his answer. Mr. Haru studied Daniel for a long moment, then gave a small nod. He said, many chase high titles and forget the ground they walk on. You are different. That is why I notice you. Daniel bowed again, his heart steady. He asked softly, how may I serve you, sir? The CEO gave a slight smile and said, tomorrow I will meet with a group of partners from Japan. They will speak only in our language. I want you there, not as janitor, but as voice. Will you accept? The words struck Daniel like a sudden wind. He had never imagined being asked to stand in such a role. Yet his spirit was calm. He bowed deeply and said, I will do my best, sir. When he left the office, the managers were waiting outside. Their eyes burned with silent anger as they watched him pass. None spoke, but their clenched jaws told enough. Daniel returned to his duties without complaint. But now the whispers in the building grew louder. A janitor chosen to assist in a meeting with partners was something no one had ever seen before. That evening, Maria caught up with him as he prepared to leave for home. She asked with concern, Daniel, is it true? Will you sit with the CEO again tomorrow? Daniel gave a small smile and nodded. Maria lowered her voice and warned him. Be careful. Some people are not happy about this. They think you are stepping into their place. Daniel thanked her gently and said, truth will always show in the end. I must do what I am asked with respect. The next day came quickly. The conference room was prepared with fine detail. The partners from Japan arrived, men in dark suits with quiet steps. They bowed politely as they entered. The managers stood at the side, nervous and stiff. At the head of the table, Mr. Haru waited, calm as ever. Beside him sat Daniel, not in uniform but in a simple suit given to him by the assistants. It fit plainly, yet on him it looked dignified. The meeting began in Japanese. The partners spoke smoothly, their voices carrying weight. Daniel translated their words for the staff who did not understand. His tone was clear, respectful, and without error. When the managers presented their plans, Daniel delivered their words in Japanese, making them sound polished and professional. For the first time, their work was understood without struggle. The partners listened with interest, nodding with approval. As the hours passed, it became clear that Daniel was the bridge holding the meeting together. Without him, the room would have been full of confusion. With him, every word moved smoothly from one side to the other. The partners smiled at him, speaking with ease. Even the silent CEO seemed lighter, more open, as if he had found someone he could trust to carry meaning without fear. By the end of the meeting, the partners shook hands warmly with the CEO. They left the room satisfied, their respect clear in their faces. Mr. Haru turned to Daniel and gave a small bow of gratitude. The managers, however, stood silent with tight expressions. They had been useful, but not essential. The one who had carried the day was the janitor that evening. As Daniel walked home, he thought about all that had happened. He felt no pride, only a deep sense of duty. He knew his role was still simple: to serve with respect, whether through cleaning or through words. But he also felt the weight of eyes upon him. Some full of admiration, others full of envy. The path ahead would not be easy. The sun rose bright over the city, but inside Marlowe Industries the air was heavy with tension. The success of the meeting with the Japanese partners had brought great praise from the CEO, yet instead of joy, the managers carried bitterness in their hearts. They had watched a janitor sit beside their leader, guiding the flow of words, and they felt their power slip. What they had built over years now seemed weaker compared to the quiet strength of one man. They had ignored. Daniel, however, began his day as he always did. He pushed his mop across the lobby floor, careful and steady. The marble tiles reflected the morning light, shining under his work. He hummed softly to himself, his mind calm. He did not seek glory and did not chase favor. For him, the act of doing a task well was enough. Yet he could not deny that his life was changing. People no longer passed him without notice. Some greeted him with respect, while others whispered behind his back. Daniel accepted both with silence. At mid-morning, Mr. Haru called him once again. This time, the meeting was not about partners or directors. It was private. The assistant led Daniel into the tall office, where the silent CEO stood by the window as usual. His eyes looked out over the city, but his thoughts seemed far away. When Daniel bowed, the CEO turned and motioned for him to sit. They spoke in Japanese. Mr. Haru asked Daniel about his life outside the company. Did he have family? Did he have dreams beyond cleaning floors? Daniel answered with honesty. He explained he lived alone, that he had once hoped to become a teacher, but life had led him to simpler work. He said he found peace in small duties, and he never allowed disappointment to grow into bitterness. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. The CEO listened without interrupting. Finally, he said, Daniel, do you understand why I value you? It is not only because you speak my language. Many can learn words, but few carry humility with strength. You are unseen by many, yet you see everything. You are silent, yet you listen. That is why I trust you. Daniel bowed his head, unsure what to reply. He said softly, Sir, I am grateful, but I am only a janitor. My place is simple. Mr. Haru shook his head. No place is simple if it carries respect. A man who honors small work can also honor great work. That is what others forget. The assistants in the room watched closely. They could see the rare warmth in their leader's eyes. The silent CEO was known to keep distance from most, but with Daniel he spoke with unusual openness. They knew this was something uncommon. Later that day, rumors grew stronger. People spoke of Daniel being seen again in the CEO's office, this time for a long talk. Some employees believed he was being offered a higher role. Others believed he would leave the janitor's post altogether. The managers grew restless. In their own private office, they argued again. One of them slammed his hand on the table and said, Enough. We must act. If the CEO continues to raise this man, we will lose all standing. Another agreed, saying, We should remind everyone of his true place. He cleans floors, nothing more. That afternoon, as Daniel worked in the upper hall, one manager approached him with a false smile. He said loudly, so others could hear, Daniel, perhaps you should leave the cleaning to us now. After all, you are busy speaking with the CEO. Maybe mopping is below you now. His tone was mocking, but Daniel did not rise to it. He looked up with calm eyes and replied, Every task has honor, whether small or great. I will never forget that. Then he bent down and continued wiping the floor until it shined. The workers nearby saw this and felt a quiet respect. The manager's attempt to humiliate him only made Daniel look stronger. Yet the anger of the managers only deepened. They whispered that they would find a way to make him fall. As evening came, Daniel walked home under the fading light. His steps were steady, but inside he felt a small unease. He knew the managers were not pleased. He knew whispers could turn into actions. Yet he also felt a deep trust in the CEO's words. For the first time in many years, Daniel felt he was not walking alone. Someone powerful had seen him, not for title or wealth, but for the strength of his spirit. In his small room, Daniel sat by the window, looking out at the stars. He thought about the path he had walked, from quiet janitor to interpreter for leaders. He wondered where this path would lead. He did not wish for riches or high office. He only wished to serve with respect. Yet destiny seemed to be placing him in a place larger than he had ever imagined. The next day would decide much. The managers were planning in silence. The CEO was watching closely. And Daniel, with mop in one hand and knowledge in his heart, was standing at the center of it all. The morning at Marlowe Industries felt heavier than usual. The success of Daniel's work with the Japanese partners had given him quiet respect among many employees, but it also sparked envy in the managers. Their eyes followed him everywhere. Every step he took was watched. Every word he spoke, no matter how soft, seemed to echo in their minds. They whispered among themselves, planning how to undermine him. They could not allow a janitor to gain such influence in their company. Daniel, unaware of the plotting, moved through the lobby as usual. He pushed the mop slowly, listening to the quiet hum of the building. He greeted a few employees politely, but mostly kept his mind on his work. He knew his duties well and found satisfaction in them. Cleaning was more than a task for him, it was a way to show respect to the place and the people who used it. Around mid-morning, one manager approached Daniel with a forced smile. He said loudly, "Daniel, perhaps today you could avoid the executive floor. You might distract important work. Others may not be ready for your presence." Daniel looked up calmly. He said softly, "Respect is never a distraction. It is the path to understanding." Then he continued his work without raising his voice. The manager's lips tightened, and he walked away. Behind him, the other managers watched with silent anger. They knew their schemes must be careful. Any open confrontation could backfire. Yet the desire to regain control of the building grew stronger with each passing hour. Later that day, Daniel received a summons from Mr. Haru. He stepped into the executive office and bowed. The CEO looked at him and spoke in Japanese. Daniel listened carefully. The CEO explained that a new project was beginning with international partners. They wanted someone who could communicate clearly in both English and Japanese. He asked Daniel if he would assist in translating and guiding the discussions. Daniel bowed and replied, "I will do my best, sir." The CEO smiled faintly. He said, "This project will test many. Some may try to mislead. Some may hide the truth. You must speak clearly and honestly. Your words will carry weight." Daniel nodded, understanding the responsibility he was about to accept. As he left the office, he felt the weight of eyes on him again. The managers were standing near the elevators, whispering and watching. Their expressions showed envy and fear. They were already planning to challenge him during the meetings, hoping to catch him in a mistake. Daniel ignored them. He knew fear and envy had no place in his mind. He focused on the work ahead. The next day, the meeting with international partners began. The room was wide, filled with people in dark suits. Charts, graphs, and presentations were prepared. The managers were nervous, ready to assert control. But Daniel stood quietly beside the CEO, ready to guide communication between languages. When the partners spoke, Daniel translated smoothly and respectfully. When the managers spoke in English, he conveyed their meaning in Japanese with accuracy and clarity. His presence kept the room calm and focused. During a crucial moment, one manager tried to challenge Daniel. He spoke quickly, hoping to make the janitor appear ignorant. Daniel listened without interruption. Then he repeated the message clearly, accurately, and politely. The partners nodded with understanding, the CEO remained calm, and the manager froze. His attempt to discredit Daniel had failed. The room remained tense for several minutes. Daniel continued with quiet precision, translating words, clarifying meanings, and answering questions when asked. He never boasted, never interrupted, and never spoke out of turn. Yet his calm confidence guided the entire meeting successfully. When the meeting ended, the partners shook hands with the CEO, praising the smooth communication. Mr. Haru turned to Daniel and gave a small bow. He said in Japanese, "Your work today was excellent. You carried the voices of all without error. The truth is clear because of your calm mind." Daniel bowed in return, feeling only gratitude for the trust placed in him. The managers left the room silently, their pride wounded. They realized that despite their power and years in the company, it was Daniel's humility and skill that had ensured success. They were forced to acknowledge, at least to themselves, that he was no ordinary janitor. Back in the lobby, employees whispered in admiration. Maria approached Daniel once more. She said softly, "Everyone is talking about you. You carried the meeting without fear." Daniel shook his head. He said, "I did not carry it alone. Every voice matters. Respect makes the difference." That evening, Daniel walked home under the quiet sky. He thought about the day's events. He knew the managers would not easily forget, and that envy could turn to action. Yet he also knew that truth, respect, and honesty held more power than fear or pride. He felt calm. He knew he was standing in the right place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The managers would continue to watch, and the projects would grow in importance. Yet Daniel's confidence was steady. His work, his respect for others, and his skill in language were his strength. Whatever came next, he would face it with patience, humility, and quiet courage. The week had been long at Marlowe Industries, yet Daniel began the day as usual. He arrived early, mop in hand, and moved steadily across the marble floors. The sunlight reflected softly, making the building glow. Employees greeted him quietly. Some whispered about the meetings he had guided, about the trust the CEO had placed in him. Others looked away, unsure of what to think. The managers watched from their offices, tense and silent, waiting for a chance to challenge him. Today, however, would be different. Mr. Haru had called for a final review of the international project before it launched. All key players were to attend, including the partners from Japan and the senior managers. The conference room was prepared meticulously. Charts were arranged, files stacked neatly, and every chair positioned in perfect order. Daniel was asked to assist once more. This time, he would not only translate but also explain cultural nuances that could affect the decisions of the partners. When Daniel entered the room, the atmosphere was tense. The managers tried to assert authority, speaking quickly and sharply. Some whispered to each other, hoping to guide the conversation. Daniel stood quietly beside the CEO, listening with calm attention. When the partners spoke, he translated each word carefully, keeping the meaning clear. When the managers spoke in English, he translated into Japanese with accuracy and respect, ensuring the partners understood clearly without confusion. During the discussion, one manager attempted to mislead the partners with exaggerated numbers. Daniel paused, then translated the message honestly but politely. He did not accuse, he did not judge, he only presented the truth clearly. The partners understood, and the room fell silent. The manager's face reddened, and the other managers shifted nervously. The silent CEO's eyes met Daniel's, and he gave a small nod of approval. The meeting continued smoothly because of Daniel. He guided the conversation, clarified points, and answered questions about subtle meanings that could be lost between languages. Every time he spoke, his calm tone and clear words commanded respect. The partners nodded, impressed by the clarity and honesty he provided. Even the managers began to realize that without Daniel, the meeting might have been chaotic and confusing. At the end of the session, Mr. Haru stood and spoke to the room in Japanese. Daniel translated each word carefully for the others. The CEO praised the smooth cooperation, the clear understanding, and the honesty shown by all parties. Then he paused and turned to Daniel. In Japanese, he said, "Your service today was invaluable. You guided the words of all without error. You have shown patience, respect, and skill. Your work has strengthened this company." Daniel bowed his head quietly, feeling only gratitude. He replied softly, "Sir, I am honored to serve. I only did what was asked of me." The partners stood and shook hands with the CEO and then with Daniel. Their smiles were warm, and they spoke words of thanks in Japanese. The managers looked on in silence, their pride humbled. They realized that Daniel, a man they once overlooked, had earned the respect of everyone in the room. He had been calm, honest, and capable, qualities that no title or office could replace. After the meeting, the employees in the lobby whispered excitedly. Many had waited to hear how the day would end. Maria approached Daniel once more. She said, "You have changed everything. People will not see you the same again." Daniel shook his head gently. He said, "I only did what I could. Respect and honesty do not change, they only show themselves when the time is right." Even the managers began to understand something important. Over the following days, they stopped plotting and watched Daniel with quiet acknowledgement. His strength was not in anger, not in ambition, but in his steady patience and his respect for every task. They learned, though slowly, that true influence comes from integrity, not position. Mr. Haru, meanwhile, began to give Daniel small responsibilities beyond translation. He asked him to assist in meetings, prepare reports for international partners, and provide insight into communication challenges. Daniel accepted each task with calm diligence. He did not boast. He did not seek attention. He simply served faithfully, showing that one could rise through skill and respect rather than ambition alone. Months passed, and the project launched successfully. The partners praised the team, and the company grew stronger internationally. Daniel continued to clean the floors, but now he moved with quiet confidence. People greeted him with respect, and managers often asked his advice on matters of communication. Yet he never let this change him. His heart remained humble, and his work continued with the same care as before. One evening, as Daniel locked the lobby and prepared to leave, Mr. Haru appeared quietly behind him. The CEO smiled slightly and said, "You have done well, Daniel. You remind everyone that the simplest work, done with care and honesty, is never small. The world notices when respect is true." Daniel bowed and said softly, "Thank you, sir. I only follow what is right." The CEO nodded and turned to leave. Daniel stepped outside into the evening air. The city lights shone softly, reflecting in the streets. He walked home slowly, feeling peace. He had never sought glory, yet through humility, skill, and respect, he had earned a place where few could reach. And from that day forward, the janitor who had mopped floors and spoken quietly to the silent CEO became a symbol in the building. Not because of ambition, not because of wealth, but because he showed everyone that courage, honesty, and respect could open doors that titles alone never could. Daniel smiled gently as he walked home, knowing that a life lived with integrity is a life that leaves a mark that can never be erased.